Kellyanne Conway described it this way.
He was having any number of calls, and that in the end he felt he had misled or misrepresented all the facts to the president and to the vice president, and for that he was enormously and deeply sorry. And that really was the linchpin here, is that he either forgot, couldn't fully recall, or outwardly misled the vice president and others when he was characterizing a conversation he had had with the Russian ambassador. And I think that the situation became increasingly unsustainable, and he decided to resign.
So in Flynn's absence, President Trump has named retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg as acting National Security Advisor. Said he'd be considering Kellogg, along with former CIA Director David Petraeus and Vice Admiral Robert Harwood, for the permanent position.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the very latest story. John, how did this all unfold?
Shannon, good morning to you. You can kind of see it progressing throughout the day, and in fact I would say probably over the last 2 weeks, maybe even going all the way back to the controversy over Flynn and potentially trying to get trying to get security clearance for his son. I mean, it's the sort of thing that looks like it's been a long time coming, and you could bet the Democrats are only going to say, well, this is the tip of the iceberg. Who was Flynn acting on behalf of when he was having these conversations with the Russian ambassador? So the White House is driving the narrative this morning, and it is in their interest as well to drive this narrative, that it wasn't the phone calls with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States, that did him in. It was the fact that he had given misleading information to the vice president, who then went out and repeated it on national television. Let's read a little bit from Flynn's resignation letter of late yesterday, where he said, quote, "I inadvertently briefed the vice president-elect and others with incomplete information regarding my phone calls with the Russian ambassador. I have sincerely apologized to the president and the vice president, and they have accepted my apology." They also accepted his resignation. Here's more from Kellyanne Conway from a short time ago on Fox.
The fact is that the president is a very loyal person, and he has a team here that serves him very admirably. And in this case, information had been forthcoming for a while, but the situation had gotten to, I think, a fever pitch yesterday, later in the day, such that it became unsustainable.
It was a difficult decision for the president to make because Lieutenant General Michael Flynn had been such a loyal soldier. I went to numerous events across the country, Shannon, during the election campaign where Flynn got up there and introduced the president, offered a spirited promotion of his public policies. I was told that the president was willing to hang in on Flynn, but then Flynn decided that, he was becoming too much of a distraction and had to go. And it was really interesting yesterday, too, to watch the body language on this, Shannon, because you had Kellyanne Conway come out about 3:30 in the afternoon saying that the president has full confidence in Flynn. I mean, that's the kiss of death in Washington. If anybody ever says that to you, start looking for a job. And then I heard from a senior administration official that some other things were going on, and then we actually bumped into the president in the hallway. And we asked the president about Reince Priebus. Is he doing a good job? He says, no, not a good job, a great job. Then we asked about Flynn, and he said, we're about to put out a statement. So you look at those two contrasting pieces of body language, you knew at that point that Flynn was toast.
Yeah, and a lot of folks also looking at that handshake between the vice president and Flynn walking into that joint press conference yesterday as well. Okay, so now we move on to the next step. Who replaces Flynn? Tell us about the leading candidates.
Well, senior White House official tells me that the leading candidate is Vice Admiral Robert Harwood. He's there on the left. He was the former deputy commander at CENTCOM, and this is very interesting, too. He served under General James Mattis. Mattis, of course, is over at the Pentagon, and you could have a pretty tight line of communication between Harwood here at the White House and Mattis over at the Pentagon, should Harwood become the National Security Advisor. He's a Navy SEAL. He was with SEAL Team 3, spent an awful lot of time in special operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was in the NSC under President Bush back in 2003, was also assigned to the National Counterterrorism Center. This guy is described by senior White House officials as tough as nails, a real rock, no games, the type of guy you'd want to have at the president's ear. Also in the mix, General David Petraeus. He has been a favorite of President Trump's. He was looking for a job for him here at the White House, but felt that he had too many generals. And then, of course, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who is the Chief of Staff of the NSC and the acting National Security Advisor. Looks like Harwood's probably got the inside track. If they do choose him, he could start as early as Friday, I'm told. Shannon?
Well, time is of the essence on this particular topic. John, good to have all the updates. Thank you for following it minute by minute.
There's a lot more to get to right now. Analysis, Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner, and a Fox News contributor. And Byron, good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill.
Put the pieces together. What's the backstory as you get it now?
Well, right now, I think you have the White House really pushing out this story that General Flynn had to go because he lied to the vice president about the nature, what was discussed in that phone call with the Russian ambassador. But the White House is actually going to have to face a lot of questions about reports that the Justice Department actually told the White House 3 weeks ago that there were serious problems with Flynn, that he was not telling the truth about these phone calls, and that he had perhaps misled the vice president. They knew it back then. So what they've been doing for the last 3 weeks. On a bigger sense, though, you're going to have a fight now erupting very much in the open between supporters of the White House who are saying Flynn was fired because he lied to the vice president, end of story, and Democrats who were saying, well, we have to find out what's going on. We have to see how far this knowledge of perhaps improper contacts with the Russians went, and we're already hearing people repeat that old Watergate phrase, what did the president know and when did he know it? So this fight is actually just beginning.
I would agree with that. You're going to hear that from Democrats, too. We're going to talk to Ron Johnson in a moment about all that. Kellyanne Conway did numerous interviews earlier today, and in two of those interviews, at least, she mentioned this conversation she had with President Trump earlier today, in which he referenced the following comment from Charles Krauthammer last night here on Fox, and when the doctor said this.
This is a cover-up without a crime. The idea that one should be all aghast because the incoming national security advisor spoke with the Russian ambassador and spoke about sanctions seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. The idea that it was illegal is preposterous. When I hear Nancy Pelosi get all upset about this and how in the grip of the Russians this shows us to be, this is an absurdity.
Cover up without a crime. So the president clearly heard that comment and relayed that to Kellyanne Conway. So how do we put that now into the mix as we gain understanding, Byron?
What Charles said was extremely important, because what he was saying, his opinion, is that not only is it not a problem if during the transition General Flynn talked to the Russian ambassador, it's not a problem if they talked about sanctions. Now, Democrats are trying to say, no, that could possibly be a violation of the Logan Act, which prevents private citizens from conducting diplomacy on behalf of the United States of America, or it's improper, or it's some sort of payback to the Russians for trying to interfere in the campaign. There are a lot of questions you're going to see Democrats ask, and I think one of the reasons that the White House is going to embrace Charles's idea here is they're basically saying, yeah, I talked about sanctions. So what? That's not really a problem. The problem here was that Flynn misled the vice president. So you're going to see those two positions clashing a lot.
Yeah, your point about the Russian connections will continue. This reflects back on the election again, and Democrats are going to take that and run with it. How far can they go? Do you know?
Well, there are already going to be investigations in the intelligence committees in the House and the Senate, and the way, obviously, Democrats don't control any part of the government at the moment, but they do have minority rights in those committees, and we're going to hear a lot about it, and they're going to be able to get classified information. So just through their positions on Capitol Hill, I think you're going to get to see them trying to keep this story alive week after week, month after month.
Byron, thanks. Analysis there
Thank
in
you,
Washington.
Bill.
You bet. 9 minutes now past the hour. Shannon.
President Trump and his administration signaling they're supportive of having a fuller panel of judges from the Ninth Circuit take another look at his executive order on immigration. 3 of the court's judges continued a stay on the order last Thursday. Now, briefs from the parties are due to the Ninth Circuit by Thursday. After that, if a majority of the active judges in that circuit vote yes, then a panel of 11 judges will consider the case. President Trump still stands by his reasons for issuing that immigration order.
On the home front, we have to create borders. We have to let people that can love our country in, and I want to do that. We want to have a big, beautiful, open door, and we want people to come in and come in our country. But we cannot let the wrong people in, and I will not allow that to happen during this administration.
Judge Andrew Napolitano on these new developments coming up in our next half hour. And Bill, they also include a ruling by a federal judge out of Virginia, ruled against the executive order and specifically cited an interview that Trump had done with her own Bill O'Reilly as part of her evidence for putting the kibosh on it.
So more coming up on that. I think also this Flynn stuff too here. You have to think about how loyal he was to the president, how he was on board from really the very beginning. How he was the guy that President Trump chose to speak on night one at the convention in Cleveland, Ohio. This is a guy they were in lockstep together.
Politics is tough business.
Yes. So the president now promised to deliver on immigration, now outraged from the other side of the aisle for trying to fulfill that promise.
We have now reached a low point in American journalism. As for the far left, they are people who do not want any immigration enforcement. They want open borders. They want alien criminals protected. They want anarchy.
So that from last night and this from today. All these recent raids taking hundreds of convicted criminals off the streets. Why do some people have a problem with that? We'll debate it fair and balanced from the right and the left today. Also.
Plus, it looks like a crisis has been averted in California where the nation's tallest dam threatened to break. How long until people there can actually go back home?
Also, General Flynn is out after his contact with the Russian ambassador recorded by the NSA. But was the spy agency breaking the law by eavesdropping on him in the first place? Senate Homeland Security Chairman Ron Johnson is here to take on that in a moment, live from the Hill.
First off, you have the whole issue of General Flynn is an American citizen. He should not have his phone calls listened to by the FBI or anyone else for that matter.
So now the resignation of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn raising some questions about U.S. intelligence gathering. Some lawmakers questioning how the NSA knew about Flynn's contacts with Russia and why the information was leaked to the media. Now, the House Intelligence Committee chair now asking the FBI for more details about all of this.
If you look at what's leaked out about General Flynn, the National Security Advisor's conversations that he was having with the Russian ambassador, I've just never seen anything like it. And I can't understand for the life of me why people aren't up in arms saying what's going on with our national security in this country, and how can there be this many leaks that are doing so much damage to President Trump and his new administration.
Well, Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. Senator, how are you? And good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
You. Apparently, we reached out to Michael Flynn earlier today, and the question was asked about the targeted, coordinated leaks and possibly whether or not they were a violation of law. To which all of those three questions, General Flynn said yes, yes, and yes. Now, where are you on this? Were there leaks or not?
Well, first of all, I want to see this president succeed. There are so many challenges America faces. We have to have a president that can actually succeed. And I'm concerned about that. I'm glad people are starting to ask that question. The first thing that I thought of when I started hearing about these leaks is, again, you've got an agency that is not supportive, loyal to the President of the United States. One of the questions I asked, for example, Rex Tillerson in his confirmation hearing is, Mr. Tillerson, how are you going to handle managing a department who, let's face it, are filled with a bunch of people who not only don't agree with the president's foreign policy, are actually hostile to it. That's something this president's going to have to come to grips with. He's going to have to get control over, but it's going to be an enormous challenge because you have the entrenched bureaucracy, whether it's in the Intelligence Committee, whether it's in the State Department, throughout government, that is going to be opposed to somebody who's really coming to change as a change agent. People don't like change, and so there's going to be a great deal of resistance, but I, for one, want to see this president succeed.
So, some specific questions here. Who has access to this information?
In terms of exactly what happened, well,
the conversation that was conducted, who has access to that, Senator?
That would be somebody in the nebulous intelligence community. I think those are the questions have to be asked. Who tapped the phones? Who is listening to it? Who leaked it? I think those are legitimate questions to ask, but it better asked in a classified setting to really get to the facts.
Okay, so were laws broken then?
I'm not a lawyer. I really do not know, but let's face it, leaks of this nature are incredibly damaging to America, to our national security, and we need to look into it.
Under the FISA law and the FISA courts, you can listen to conversations from those overseas, but you have to have cause in order to listen to conversations on Americans. So then, as you interpret that law, was that a violation? Was the law broken or not?
again, I don't want to be discussing things that really should be only discussed in a classified setting. And that's the problem with what these leaks are. I mean, we are now talking about what the U.S. government is doing, monitoring different types of phone calls. That never should have been leaked. It should not be in the public domain right now, but it is, and that's very unfortunate, which is why I think this is quite serious.
Nancy Pelosi came out with a statement moments ago. I'm just going to read it off my computer. Flynn's resignation is a reflection of the poor judgment of President Trump and demands answers to the grave questions over the president's involvement. What would you say to the House Minority Leader on that, Senator?
Well, I wasn't privy to any of these conversations, so I don't know exactly why, in the end, General Flynn decided to resign. But I actually do appreciate in a leader loyalty to people that work for that leader. And that's certainly, Donald Trump comes from the private sector, where he's used to people being loyal to him and to his organization. I've been trying to counsel cabinet members from the private sector. I'm from the private sector. Washington, D.C. government is an alternate universe. The laws of physics that we're kind of used to applying in the private sector don't apply here. And then even within government politics, the difference between campaign and governing is different. And so this is going to be something that a new president coming from the private sector is going to have to get used to. This is a different universe, and he's going to figure out what kind of laws of physics apply in this place.
Senator, last question on that. How long does that adjustment take, do you believe?
It's got to be a very rapid transformation, because look at what's happening in North Korea. But again, it would be very helpful if the individuals in these agencies and these departments actually were loyal to a new administration. I'm afraid we're seeing that that's not the case. That's what alarms me most about this instance.
Senator, thank you for your time. Ron Johnson reacting to a lot of breaking news as it happens. Thank you, sir, for your time today, and we'll speak very soon.
Have a good day.
All right, Shannon, what's next?
Well, Republican lawmakers facing an eruption of rage as angry constituents swarm town hall events. Is it a grassroots movement or something pretty pre-planned and very well funded? A live report on that next.
This was the first time a police department decided I needed an armed escort to safely leave the event. So something very different is going on and very ugly.
Out the Senate confirming two more members of President Trump's cabinet yesterday. They are David Shulkin becoming the next VA Secretary of Veterans Affairs in a unanimous vote there. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin faced a tougher confirmation. Only one Democratic senator voted in favor of Mnuchin, and that was Joe Manchin from the state of West Virginia.
I share your economic vision and goals and committed to working with you to enact policies to grow the economy and make better economic opportunities for all Americans.
So that from the White House late yesterday. Next up on confirmation, Labor Secretary nominee Andrew Puzder, who will face the Senate for hearing on Thursday. Some Republicans have expressed reservations about him, so we will watch that as it goes.
No surprise, Democrats are looking to slow the Trump agenda in any way possible. Some constituents even hijacking Republican town halls, including one in Florida, where Congressman Gus Bilirakis was bombarded by boos and concerns about the future of the Affordable Care Act. Listen. McElway's live from Washington with details. All right, Doug, a lot of these protests are being equated to the Tea Party movement of a few years back. Is it a fair comparison?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, Shannon. The victims or the objects of all this ire, specifically the GOP congressman at local town halls, sense that this is organized from on high, that it's astroturfing, funded perhaps through the murky world of Democratic financier George Soros or other party money people. But if you talk to the protesters or the Democratic activists, there is a belief this is organic, much like the Tea Party.
So much of the energy is organic. There have been somewhere around 80 to 90 organizations that have started just since the election. The majority of those people starting the organizations have never organized before. They've never been involved in politics before. They're moving on what they're feeling from their peers, that people want to be organized and they want to come together.
But it's not just at town halls where we're seeing this. Democrats and others are throwing up obstacles to Trump's agenda everywhere, from the halls of Congress to the courts to media coverage to street protests, campus rioting. It is a full assault on the new administration. The question is, can the left translate that into success at the ballot box 2 years from now, as the Tea Party did during the Obama administration? The answer? may lie in the people who won this election for Trump, the swing state, mostly white, blue-collar voter who doesn't give a hoot about social justice, Trump's insults, or his Twitter feed. One candidate for the DNC chair says his party risks further alienation if it ignores those people.
They don't really give a crap about if the president is an insult dog. The reality is we did not offer a positive message to anyone that I'm related to. We did not offer a message to my neighbors. We did not offer a message to the people in Indiana or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Kentucky. What we did is we said, how offensive. Grow up. That's not reality for most of America.
Buckley says those voters worry about jobs coming back and their paychecks, what their kids are being taught at school, not Trump's offensiveness. Shannon?
Okay, so we know historically during the midterm elections, generally it's the party that is out of power that does better. What do we think this time around?
That's right. That is definitely the case, but it is not always the case that the president's party loses seats in midterm elections. The small majority that Republicans hold in the Senate is a reminder that Trump has to keep those promises about manufacturing jobs and putting Americans back to work. If he fails there, that silent majority may not be so forgiving. Shannon?
All right, Doug McElway in Washington. Thank you.
28 minutes past the hour. Get the opening bell in a couple moments here. Had a big day yesterday, too. In the meantime, what's the status on Obamacare? Repeal and replace? Well, the Vice President, Mike Pence, meeting with Republicans. Some are worried they are not moving fast enough. Will the House vote to repeal before the new plan is ready to go? We'll find out in a moment.
And the president's temporary travel ban moving on several legal tracks, all different across the country this morning. Judge Napolitano will be here to break down what happens now going forward.
It's a stance of common sense. Maybe a certain toughness, but it's really more than toughness. It's a stance of common sense, and we are going to pursue it vigorously.
At 9:32, markets are open. Had a big day yesterday after big gains. The Dow and Nasdaq both closing at record highs for a third session in a row. Wow. Recent market gains coming after President Trump announced last week that he's going to have some information on a tax plan within 2 to 3 weeks. And the markets like that rising in general since the president won the election last fall, up about 2,000 points in trading. Also, this from the White House just a moment ago. The first response, you could say, on Twitter from President Trump with regard to what's happening with General Michael Flynn. He said the following: the real story here is, why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc.? So again, that's coming out from the White House and the president just a moment ago. More on this in a moment here on America's Newsroom. 33 past the hour now. Shannon.
And we've got breaking developments on the president's temporary travel ban on two fronts. The White House now says it's supportive of another new hearing at the Ninth Circuit by a panel of 11 judges instead of just the 3 who so far have backed a hold on his executive order on immigration. And in Virginia, a federal judge issuing an injunction ruling the ban is likely unconstitutional on religious grounds. Judge Andrew Napolitano is Fox News senior judicial analyst. He's helping us track all across the country what's going on. But basically, it's still very much in play.
It is. There are 48 lawsuits. We know about the one in Virginia, relatively new. We know about the one in Seattle because of the action in the Ninth Circuit. Look, the president should take, in my view, should take the Ninth Circuit opinion and use it as a guideline as to how to make a new executive order bulletproof. If he rips up the executive order of January 27, he stops the 48 litigations, he undermines the opinion of the Ninth Circuit, but he has a guideline as to how more liberal, not just liberal, but more liberal judges are likely to attack this. So if you can make it, as we say, you know this phrase, Shannon, you're a lawyer, bulletproof, you know, virtually immune from appeal, he'll have a stronger executive order. He will have the security at the nation's airports and seaports that he wants, and he will have undermined his political opponents, who are many and vociferous these days.
They are, and you know how it works. I mean, it doesn't cost most places much to file a lawsuit, and there's much to be gained if you think that you can ultimately stop this action that you're against.
Particularly if you have judges who want to second guess the president by saying things like something he said in August is the reason, when he was a candidate, is the reason for a decision in January. Or worse yet, something one of his supporters said in August is a reason for a decision he made after he's inaugurated. I don't think you've ever seen that. I've never seen that.
No, and it's interesting. I was reading the judge's order out of Virginia, and this is the one that's actually put an injunction, at least as far as Virginia residents and schools in Virginia, a stay there. It's not nationwide, but this is part of what she said, because she talked about TV interviews that Trump has done back when he was a candidate, now he's the president, and some that he's made since. And she said the evidence in this record focuses on the president's statements about a, quote, Muslim ban and the link that Giuliani established between those statements and the executive order. She went through all of these statements in these TV interviews that they both had done and said that was enough evidence for her to say this probably violates religious freedom and it can't move forward.
So what she's saying is because the burden of the executive order falls disproportionately on people who are Muslim, it is therefore an anti-Muslim order. And that is not the law of the land. The law of the land is that foreign policy is in the hands of the president, and the Congress has given him many tools, one of which is the right to suspend immigration. As long as the reason for the suspension is not religion, it can fall disproportionately on people who belong to one religion. The distinction between purpose and effect has never been applied in the area of foreign policy. But this is something that the president can accommodate by explaining these things in the executive order.
Well, and she even addressed, the Virginia judge, the fact that there's been a lot of discussion that these countries were decided for a special classification under the Obama administration. It's not as if the Trump administration went and picked these 7 countries. So some say, okay, put out a new executive order, include other countries we think are a threat, like North Korea and others, maybe beef it up in ways that take some of these arguments away.
Look, suppose the intelligence community went to President Obama in December and said, we have reason to believe, Obama, we have reason to believe that some lone wolves are going to come in from 3 or 4 of these countries, and most of these lone wolves have more than one passport, so we're not certain which country. And he didn't do anything about it. And then they made the same statement to President Trump, and he decided, well, that's it. We don't want these lone wolves coming into the country. We're going to stop everybody. Wouldn't that be a sound basis for the exercise of presidential discretion? Absolutely. Should he have to explain that to a judge to justify the exercise of his discretion? Absolutely not.
All right, so what now? We have all these different things bubbling, and it looks like the Ninth Circuit is going to make a decision soon. Obviously, if they decide not to do the extended panel, the administration could go to the Supreme Court. A lot of people cautioning against that.
Well, look, we have a trial that's going to start in Seattle before the trial judge who issued the nationwide restraining order. And that trial will test the bases, the reasons for the president's order. The president doesn't want that trial because he doesn't want to reveal the reasons for his order. So we're sort of in a little limbo. Is the Ninth Circuit going to review this again with a larger group than just the 3 who reviewed it last week? They have 3 or 4 days to make up their mind. Meantime, the states that are suing the federal government get to acquire information from the president. The president's lawyers get to acquire information from them, and both sides are gearing up for a trial. Should foreign policy be decided by trial judges or by the President of the United States?
And maybe in the meantime we get a new executive order if they're listening to the judge and his advice. Judge, always good to see you.
Likewise, Jen.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you guys for watching this. A racing block, Northern California, where they are trying to repair this dam in hopes of heading off a potential catastrophe. A massive rainstorm might bring more trouble later this week. Meanwhile, you've got thousands of evacuated homeowners now in limbo. Claudia Kalman live in Oroville, California. And what's the status on fixing that emergency spillway that is of such concern, Claudia?
Bill, the work is happening around the clock, and you can see some of the big construction crews behind me moving around these boulders at the top of the dam. Now, these rocks are being bagged up and moved out to patch up the dam's emergency spillway. State water officials spent much of yesterday literally in the trenches of that spillway, guiding in a couple of Black Hawk helicopters as they dropped their heavy loads of rocks in a hole that broke open on Sunday, and try to prevent further erosion to what is essentially a ravine that had never been used as an emergency spillway before. Meantime, California Governor Jerry Brown is breaking his silence on the crisis, admitting he didn't know about a warning years ago that the dam was vulnerable, creating the possibility of a major flood. He has asked the White House for federal assistance and had this message for the thousands of people waiting to go back home.
Just know that their government, their representatives are doing everything they can, and will continue to do whatever it takes to make sure we have a safe dam up there and in all the other places where we have these kind of potential threats.
Yeah. Nearly 190,000 evacuees are waiting it out at shelters set up at schools and local fairgrounds. Some may be allowed to go home to get necessities like medicine and clothing. That plan is still being worked out. Now, the county sheriff says there is no more imminent threat that emergency spillway will collapse, but until it is significantly shored up, Bill, that mandatory evacuation order will remain in effect.
And what is the status of the dam itself, Claudia?
Right, the tallest dam in the country, Bill. Well, the water level inside the reservoir is starting to drop now down to about 890 feet above sea level. That's well below the rim, but officials want to get it down another 50 feet at least to build up capacity. And the pictures of the main spillway that's being used are just dramatic. Officials have doubled the releases there on the main spillway, even though it is damaged too. And for the next few days, we can expect the lake level to keep dropping about 4 inches an hour. Now, you mentioned that next storm that's moving in tomorrow night, early Thursday morning. It's expected to be a colder system, which means the snow level will drop. There will be less rain and less runoff. But, Bill, the challenge here, of course, is to build up capacity not just for the rains due to arrive this week, but also in the weeks ahead, not to mention all of the snow runoff arriving this spring.
Wow. Thanks, Claudia. Claudia Cowan watching all that for us today in Northern California.
All right, more on our top story. New details about what led to the resignation of now former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, and questions about how the NSA handled the information they apparently had on his phone calls with Russia. Catherine Herridge with brand new details, a full report in our next hour.
Also stepped up immigration raids, rounding up hundreds of criminal illegal immigrants. Democrats cry foul. President Trump says he's keeping his campaign promise. That is perfect for a political debate. Next.
We are going to get the bad ones, the really bad ones. We're getting them out, and that's exactly what we're doing.
If the federal government cannot remove aliens who commit serious crimes in this country, then we don't have an effective federal government. Yet the far left and the press, knowing full well that the ICE raids last week were directed at dangerous people, chose not to report that, instead smearing President Trump. We have now reached a low point in American journalism.
That from O'Reilly last night. Big topic here. This after President Trump doubling down on his defense of immigration raids that rounded up hundreds of people last week, saying he's fulfilling a campaign promise. Top Democrats stepping up their opposition to all of that. And that includes David Goodfriend, former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Clinton. Mark Thiessen, columnist for the Washington Post and a Fox News contributor. And gentlemen, good day to both of you. Okay, Mark, start now. Is President Trump doing something that is different from President Obama? Take that point first.
Not at all. I mean, this is fake news. People are treating this like this is some kind of unprecedented border action that we're taking, enforcement action. The fact is, Barack Obama deported more people than any president in American history. In fact, Barack Obama deported more illegal aliens than all the presidents in the 20th century combined. He deported between 2009 and 2015 2.5 million illegal aliens. That's an average of 1,000 a day during the course of his presidency. And that does not include the people who self-deported. That doesn't include the people who were stopped at the border and turned away. And it doesn't include the last year of his administration. When those figures come in, it'll actually be even higher. So there is nothing that President Trump is doing today that is a break from what Barack Obama did. But all of a sudden, the Democrats are up in arms about it. Disturbed about this.
Harsh words toward the President Obama at the time. Now, David, we are told that these are all moms and maids. Now, you know that's not true.
You know, I actually want to agree with something Mark said. He's absolutely right. A casual observer coming to this would say President Obama did a ton of enforcement and deportations, as my colleague says, the most in history. So what is the difference here? And I think the only way to really answer that is not to look at this issue in a vacuum. You have to look at last night's resignation of the National Security Advisor. You have to look at all the judges across America, Republicans and Democratic appointees, who have overturned and blocked President Trump's actions on immigration. I think what we really have here is a crisis of confidence in the president. Nobody really believes right now anything this president says. It's not holding up. The fake news, if you will, is what's coming out of the White House. We don't believe him anymore.
Here are the numbers now. According to ICE, the raids last week, 680 posed a threat to public safety, border security, or U.S. immigration system. Of those arrested, about 75% were criminal aliens and convicted of crimes including homicide, sexual assault, and drug trafficking. O'Reilly's big point, Mark, is that those facts have been underreported. Is that true?
They absolutely have been underreported. And again, they're not a break with the past. You know, they're saying that this is an unprecedented enforcement action, that there's 680 people. In 2015, Barack Obama rounded up 2,000 people, 3.5 times in just a period of 5 days in a single raid. They say that Barack Obama only targeted criminal aliens. That's not true. In 2016, he launched something called Operation Border Guardian that targeted all illegal immigrants that had come into the country in the last 2 years and deported thousands of women and children from the country.
Can I jump in?
So there's no difference here. And in terms of telling the truth, Donald Trump campaigned on saying he's going to do this. He's doing exactly what he said, so I don't know why you think people can't believe it.
Mark, if I may, it's an issue of incompetence out of this White House. No one's disputing your figures. I'm not. I haven't heard anybody in any journalistic outlet anywhere dispute those figures. There's a crisis in confidence in this president. His national security advisor, who oversaw immigration enforcement, by the way, had to resign and may be criminally liable. His own executive orders have been blocked by Republican judges. There is a crisis in confidence in this president in his ability to do the job.
So, David,
you may be right about this.
David, you approve, a president should have the ability, hang on one second, Mark, should have the ability and the authority to remove violent criminals.
Absolutely.
Because
no dispute.
Without that, you can't have a country, right?
Absolutely. No dispute. Like I said, President Obama did this as well. It would be very hypocritical for me to say it's wrong when President Trump does it, but it's right when President Obama does it. It's the law of the land. Enforcing the law is probably the #1 role of the executive. Let's all agree on that. Why then do you see so much concern in communities across the country about what the president does? To me, the only way you have an effective president is when people trust the president. When the president loses the trust of the population, then you get things like this, where even if he's just doing his job, people don't trust him.
There was a big impression given that these were not criminal aliens that were being arrested.
I'm reading the same news. I'm reading the same news you are.
Yeah, I got you guys, but you get the impression from a lot of outlets, and I've got to run here. We'll continue in a moment.
I don't get that impression.
But you get the impression that they're ripping families apart, and if you look at the numbers, 75% are violent criminals. David, thank you for your time today. Mark, thanks you as well.
Thank you, Bill.
You bet.
We are awaiting a House GOP news conference where we expect to get new reaction to Michael Flynn's resignation. We'll keep a close eye on that for you. We'll take you there live when it happens. Today in Washington, a lot to watch on Capitol Hill. We are awaiting remarks from Republican House leadership and the House Armed Services Committee, which is going to hold a hearing on the evolving terror threat. Peter Ducey is live from Capitol Hill with more. All right, Peter, how are Republican leaders responding to this breaking news today overnight of Flynn's resignation?
Shannon, we haven't heard anything from leadership here on the Hill just yet, but we do expect that to come a few minutes from right now. We do have some reaction, though, trickling in from people like the House Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. He says in a statement, Michael Flynn served in the U.S. military for more than 3 decades. Washington, D.C. can be a rough town for honorable people, and Flynn, who has always been a soldier, not a politician, deserves America's gratitude and respect for dedicating so much of his life to strengthening our national security. I thank him for his many years of distinguished service. Democrats, though, calling for investigations. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi just out with this. She says the FBI must accelerate its investigation of the Russian connection with the Trump administration, and Congress must call for a bipartisan, independent, outside commission to fully investigate Russia's influence on the administration and the election. So just because Flynn stepped aside does not mean that Democrats are done with him. At the same time, this morning on the Hill, just a few minutes away, there is going to be a hearing about the evolving terror threat and strategies to stop it. And we got our hands on some of the testimony that's going to be heard by the House Armed Services Committee. And one expert witness from the RAND Corporation plans to offer an opinion much different than what the White House has been pitching recently. Brian Michael Jenkins has in his prepared remarks, quote, partnering with the Russians to destroy ISIL also has been mentioned as an option, but in my view, it comes with a high cost and offers very little in return. So as the White House is figuring out who the next national security advisor should be, Congress trying to get their own advice about how to take out ISIS. Shannon?
All right, Peter Doocy, we know you'll be hustling today. Thanks.
So we could hear from House leadership on all of this, watching the microphone there on Capitol Hill. We'll get a news conference from the House Speaker Paul Ryan at the top of the hour, so stay tuned for that. Also next hour, we will likely hear from President Trump, so stay tuned, and we'll tell you what we're learning today about how and why the NSA tracked General Flynn's phone calls.